Hello. This is John T. Rhapsodes, Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. I bring you today a funny Christmas story adapted from W.D. Howells' 1892 story called Christmas Every Day. William Dean Howells walked the earth from 1837 to 1920, mostly in Ohio. He was an editor for the Atlantic Monthly, wrote short stories and novels, and he encouraged realism in American literature. If you like awesome old-school audio stories from old minds that were once young minds, brought to you free of charge and with a grateful heart, consider while listening to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications to get notice of new stories. Some funny, some spooky, others somewhere in between, and all awesome. These simple acts will help this channel immensely. And now, hear the words of old. Christmas Every Day, from 1892, by W.D. Howells. A little girl named Sally came into her father's study, as she always did on Saturday mornings before breakfast, and asked for a story. He tried to encourage her to go find something else to do, since he was very busy, but she continued undeterred. And so he began. Well, once there was a little pig. Sally put her hand over his mouth and stopped him at the word pig. She said she had already heard too many little pig stories and wanted to hear a different kind of story. Well, what kind of story should I tell then? The father asked. I want to hear a story about Christmas, since it's already past Thanksgiving, and it'll be Christmas real soon. It seems to me, her father argued, that I've told you Christmas stories as often as I have told stories about little pigs. Well, Christmas stories are more interesting, the little girl insisted. Okay then, he said. I'll tell you about the little girl that wanted Christmas to be every day of the year. How would you like that? Yay, that sounds good, she said, and she sat down next to him and made ready to listen. There once was a little pig. What? What's the matter? The father asked, as Sally poked him on the shoulder. You said little pig instead of little girl. Well, what's the difference between a little pig and a little girl that wants it to be Christmas every day? Daddy, tell the story right. At this, the father began to tell the story right. There once was a little girl who liked Christmas so much that she wanted it to be Christmas every day of the year. And as soon as Thanksgiving was over, she began to send postcards to Santa Claus to ask him to make it so. But Santa never answered any of the postcards, and after a while, the little girl found out that Santa was very particular, and he would not notice anything but actual letters, not just postcards. He would only notice real letters on sheets of paper in envelopes sealed with a monogram, or at least your initials. And so, she began to send Santa real letters in envelopes marked with her initials. And in about 3 weeks, or just the day before Christmas it was, she got a letter back from Santa saying she could have Christmas every day for a year, and then he would check back with her about having it longer. The little girl was very excited as she prepared for the old-fashioned, only-once-a-year Christmas. Because she was still skeptical, she decided to keep her deal with Santa a secret, so that everyone would be surprised. On Christmas Eve, she went to bed very early so Santa would have plenty of time to fill the house with presents. And on Christmas morning, she woke up before everyone else and ran downstairs to find that her stocking over the fireplace was lumpy and busting at the seams with candy, oranges and grapes, toys and bouncy balls, and all kinds of other small presents. Her brother's stockings had pop guns and other uninteresting things in them, and her sister's stockings had silk umbrellas sticking out of them. Her mother and father's stockings were filled with potatoes and pieces of coal wrapped in tissue paper, part of a yearly Christmas joke from Santa. The little girl waited around in the den until the rest of the family got up, and as soon as everyone was downstairs, she ran into the living room and saw piles of wrapped packages containing all sorts of wonderful presents. Toys, jewelry, a play kitchen set, skates, dolls and a dollhouse and doll clothes and doll accessories, crafting kits with paints and markers and glitter, and loads of her favorite kinds of candy. She had an exceedingly wonderful Christmas day. She ate so much candy that she did not want any breakfast. And the whole morning, presents kept pouring in from delivery men, since Santa did not have time to deliver all the presents the night before. She also went around giving presents she had gotten for other people, and then came home and ate turkey and dressing for lunch, and plum pudding, and nuts and oranges and more candy, and then went out and went sledding down the hill across the street, and then she came home with a tummy ache and was crying. And then her father said that he was glad that days like that only happened once a year. And then all the family had a light dinner, and then everyone went to bed sort of annoyed. Here, Sally poked her father's shoulder again and looked up at him with a grimace. "Well, what now? Did I say pigs?" "No, Daddy, but you made that girl act like a pig." "She did a little, didn't she?" "You shouldn't put that in a Christmas story," she replied. "Okay, then. I will take that out of the story." The father scratched his head for a moment, thinking how the story might proceed, and then he continued. The little girl slept heavily and slept very late. She was awakened at last by her brothers and sisters dancing around her bed with stockings full of presents in their hands. "What is it?" the little girl asked, and she rubbed her eyes and sat up in bed. "It's Christmas, Christmas, Christmas!" they all shouted, and waved their stockings around. "What are you talking about?" asked the little girl. "It was Christmas yesterday." Her brothers and sisters just laughed and said, "Well, it's Christmas today, too. Come downstairs and see." Then all of a sudden it occurred to the little girl that Santa was keeping his promise, and her trial year of Christmas every day was beginning. Though she was still sleepy, she sprang up like a lark that had overeaten and gone to bed annoyed, and ran down the stairs. And there again in the living room was a pile of packages with toys of all sorts, jewelry, skates, dolls, and "Daddy," interrupted Sally, "you don't need to go through the whole list again." The father smiled and continued. Well, when she went downstairs, she could see that her parents and brothers and sisters were all picking out their presents, but looked sleepy. Her father looked perfectly puzzled, and her mother looked like she would cry. Her mother said, "I don't know what I'm going to do with all this stuff. We don't have enough room." And her father said it seemed to him that they had had something like it the day before, but he supposed he might have dreamt it. This struck the little girl as the best kind of a joke. And then she ate so much candy she didn't want breakfast, and went around carrying presents to other people, and had turkey and dressing for dinner, and went out sledding, and came in with a "Daddy," Sally said, grimacing once more. "What?" the father said. "Don't you remember your promise? You don't need to say it all again." "Oh, right," the father said, and then he continued. Well, the next day, it was just the same thing over again, but everyone was getting even more annoyed. And at the end of a week's time, so many people had lost their tempers that you could pick up lost tempers anywhere, since they were strewn around all over the ground. Even when people tried to recover their own tempers, they usually picked up someone else's, and it all made a dreadful mix. The little girl began to get frightened, keeping her secret all to herself. She wanted to tell her mother, but she just couldn't. And she was ashamed to ask Santa to take back her secret gift, since it would seem ungrateful. And she thought she would try to stand it all, but she hardly knew how she could for a whole year. And so it went on and on. It was Christmas on Valentine's Day, and Washington's birthday, and it didn't even skip April Fool's Day, though as a joke, all the presents were fake that day, and that was at least some relief. After a while, coal and potatoes began to get awfully scarce, since so many had been wrapped up in tissue paper to fool mothers and fathers all over the world. Turkeys were so scarce that they got to be about $1,000 apiece, and "Daddy," Sally groaned. "What?" the father said. "You're starting to exaggerate." Okay then, they were going for $2,000 apiece. And they got to passing off almost anything as turkeys, even half-grown hummingbirds, since the real turkeys were so scarce. And cranberries, too. They were asking $1 apiece for cranberries. And all the woods and orchards were cut down for Christmas trees, and where the woods and orchards used to be, it looked just like a stubble field, with nothing but the stumps. After a while, they had to make Christmas trees out of rags, and stuff them with straw, like old-fashioned dolls. But there were plenty of rags, because people got so poor, buying presents for one another, that they couldn't get any new clothes, and they just wore their old ones to tatters. In fact, everyone got so poor that they all had to go to the poorhouse, except the candy makers and the fancy storekeepers and the toy makers and the delivery men. And they got so rich and proud that they would hardly wait upon a person when he came to buy something. It was shameful. Well, after Christmas every day had gone on for about 3 or 4 months, the little girl, whenever she came into the room in the morning, and saw those great, ugly, lumpy stockings dangling over the fireplace, and the disgusting presents around everywhere, she would just sit down and burst out crying. In 6 months she was perfectly exhausted. She couldn't even cry anymore. She just lay on the couch and rolled her eyes. About the beginning of October, she took to sitting down on her dolls wherever she found them. Baby dolls, little girl dolls, or any kind of doll. She hated the sight of them so. And by Thanksgiving she was crazy, and just slammed her presents across the room. By this time, people didn't carry presents around nicely anymore. They flung them over the fence or through the window, and instead of taking great pains to write on the gift cards attached to the packages, "For Daddy," or "Mama," or "Brother" or "Sister," or "Stella" or "Sammy," or whoever it was, and instead of troubling to get the spelling right and then signing their names, people started to write "Take it, you horrid old thing," and then they would go and bang the present against the front door. Nearly everybody had built barns to hold their presents. But pretty soon the barns overflowed, and then they let them lie out in the rain or anywhere. Sometimes the police would come and tell them to shovel their presents off the sidewalk or they would arrest them. "I thought you said everybody had gone to the poorhouse," interrupted Sally. "Well, they did, at first," the father said. "But after a while, the poorhouses got so full that they had to send people back to their own houses. They tried to cry when they got back, but they couldn't make the least bit of sound." "Why couldn't they?" Sally asked. "Because they had all lost their voices saying Merry Christmas so much." "By the way, did I tell you how it was on the 4th of July?" "No, how was it?" Sally asked, expecting something interesting. "Well, the night before the 4th of July, the boys all stayed up late excited about shooting fireworks. They woke up late and after breakfast started to wonder why they weren't hearing firecrackers like they usually did by this time. They finally went outside to shoot their own, and brought out their bags of bottle rockets and smoke bombs and firecrackers and such. But a funny thing happened. Every time they lit a fuse, it would fizzle out and nothing would happen. No pops, no booms. They kept trying to light them, but nothing would happen. Finally, they figured out that all the fireworks were made out of candy and had just been painted to look like fireworks. Before 10 o'clock in the morning, every boy in the United States found out that his 4th of July things had turned into Christmas things, and then they just sat down and cried they were so mad. There are millions of boys in the United States, and so you can imagine what a noise they made. Some men got together before night came, with a little powder that hadn't turned into purple sugar yet, and they said they would fire off at least one cannon anyway. But the cannon burst into 1,000 pieces, for it was nothing but rock candy, and some of the men nearly got killed. The 4th of July speeches all turned into Christmas carols, and when anybody tried to read the Declaration of Independence, instead of saying, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary," he was sure to sing, "God rest you merry gentlemen." It was perfectly awful. Sally squirmed a little in her seat as she was thinking. Then she asked, "And what was Thanksgiving like?" The father hesitated a moment, and then said, "Well, I'm almost afraid to tell you, because you will think it's terrible." "Please tell me anyway. I have to know how the story ends." Well, before it became Thanksgiving, it had gotten out who had caused the Christmas everyday situation. The little girl had suffered so much that she had talked about it in her sleep, and so her brothers and sisters heard about it and then told everyone. And after that, hardly anybody would play with her. People were very angry with her, because if it had not been for her greediness, the whole thing wouldn't have happened. And when Thanksgiving came, and she wanted to go to church and have pumpkin pie and turkey, and for everyone to show their gratitude, they said that all the turkeys had been eaten up for Christmas dinners, and that if she would stop the Christmas everyday situation, they would see about the gratitude. Isn't that terrible? And the very next day, the little girl began sending letters to Santa and even telegrams to please stop Christmas every day, but it didn't do any good. And so, it continued to be Christmas every day until what was supposed to be Christmas Eve on December 24th. The little girl fell asleep, and when she woke up the next morning, "Let me guess," Sally said. "It was all a dream." "No," the father said. "It was all true." "Well, what did she find out then?" She found out that it wasn't Christmas at all anymore, and that it wasn't ever going to be Christmas again. The end. Now, it's time for breakfast. Sally inched closer to her father and gently put his face between her hands and said, quietly but seriously, "You can't let this story end like that." "How do you want it to end?" "I want it to go back to being Christmas only once a year." "All right," the father said, and he continued with the story. Well, there was a great rejoicing all over the country, and it extended clear up into Canada, and the people met together everywhere and kissed and cried for joy. And the garbage trucks went around and gathered up all the candy and dumped it all into the river, which made the fish perfectly sick. And the whole United States, as far out as Alaska, was one blaze of bonfires, where the children were burning up their presents. They had the greatest time. Then the little girl went to see Santa, and to thank him for stopping it from being Christmas every day. She said she hoped he would make sure that Christmas never ever came again. Then Santa frowned and asked her if she was sure she knew what that meant. And the little girl said she did, and then Santa asked if she really meant that she didn't want any Christmases ever again for anyone forevermore. And this made the little girl think it all over carefully again. And she said she would be willing to have Christmas about once in 1,000 years. And then she said 100, and then she said 10, and at last she got down to 1. Then Santa said that the old way was the best way, that had pleased people ever since Christmas began when Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. And the little girl agreed. Then she smiled and skipped off home and was glad it all worked out. "So what do you think of that ending?" the father asked. "Well," Sally said with a thoughtful but puzzled look, "I guess it is best to just have one Christmas a year. It's Jesus' birthday anyway. Who ever heard of someone who has more than one birthday a year?" She then got out of her chair and walked towards the door as she smelled breakfast. Before leaving the study, she stopped and turned to her father and said, "It seems like Christmas is the only birthday party where everyone else gets the presents." "I suspect it is," the father said. And that concludes this adaptation of W.D. Howells' short story Christmas Every Day from 1892. This is John T. Rhapsodies, Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. Thank you for listening. So what did you think about this story? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, please download the YouTube app, create an account, subscribe to this channel, like this video by clicking on the thumbs up icon, click the notification bell, and share the videos with your friends so that they too can hear the words of old.